This video isn't me suggesting that Paul George should be the MVP frontrunner. I'm only providing reasons as to how his name could be mentioned in this conversation. And to make it clear, I believe Jokic is a clear-cut MVP this season. Before making such a bold claim and riling up the Lillard stands, I wanted to see what qualifies a player to be an MVP candidate. So I found this blog on NBA.com from 2016 with several journalists answering the question of what it takes to be the MVP. The answers ranged from that player being the best and most valuable on his team to having a transcendent season, or a season that hasn't been seen before. I came up with a few more reasons and qualifications on my own. The ones I came up with after a little brainstorming session were recency bias, or the idea that the most recent performances are remembered more, and so if a player does really well in the last quarter of the season, then his name moves up on the list. Injuries affecting the team, other star players on the team's record with and without the other star on the team's record against teams above 500, and obviously the player's stats are all factors to consider. With these in mind, I can play devil's advocate for Paul George and put his name on the list. So starting off with injuries, it seems both teams have had numerous injured players, but I'll give the edge to Dame because while he's played 52 of the 54 games, CJ McCollum has only played 29 of the 54 games. On the other hand, Kawhi Leonard hasn't come close to missing 25 games. While there were other players on each team injured, I'm only taking into account the 1-2 punches on each team. So Dame had to carry his team for those 25 games, while Paul George only carried the burden for 11 games. During these stretches, the Blazers went 3-6 against playoff teams, and the Clippers went 1-2 against playoff teams, giving each team a 33.3 win percentage against playoff teams. It seems like Dame has an advantage in value over Paul George at this point, but this is where the bigger picture comes into play. Who have the Clippers and Blazers beaten to get to the 3rd and 6th spots in the Western Conference, respectively? Preseason predictions gave the Clippers a 49-23 record, which the Clippers are surpassing by a 4-game margin, while the Blazers were predicted to be 40-32, which the Blazers are currently on pace to achieve. However, their performances against teams over 500 is where the narrative changes, and it might not be fair to put all the blame on Dame, but he has to carry some of the burden. The Clippers are 19-12 against teams over 500, while the Blazers are only 8-16 against teams over 500, giving them a 33.3 winning percentage against quote-unquote good teams at the time of playing them. I understand that wins take you to the playoffs, but do wins against good teams and wins against bad teams carry the same weight, especially when considering a player's impact over the course of the season? And yes, Paul George has had Kawhi for more of the season than Dame has had CJ, but it's not like Pat Bev, Marcus Morris, and Serge Ibaka haven't been injured over the season too. Not to mention Kawhi's recent foot injury, which has sidelined him for the last 2 games. The final piece of the puzzle is the stats. Paul George is averaging 23, 6, and 6, while Dame is averaging 29, 4, and 8. If the MVP was only based on a player's stats on a winning team, Dame would win this hypothetical argument. However, you also have to take into account what the player is missing when his all-star teammate isn't playing. Kawhi is averaging 26, 7, and 5, while CJ is averaging 23, 4, and 5, suggesting that PG-13 has a bigger hill to climb when Kawhi is out. But you wouldn't know it given the same win percentage against teams over 500 without Kawhi and without CJ. In my opinion, both of these players are having great seasons. But since everyone's name is being thrown into the MVP blender, I wanted to give PG-13 some recognition too. Also, recency bias plays into his favor because he scored over 30 points over the last 4 games, all of which have been wins, and not to mention that Kawhi Leonard has also been out for the past 2 games. So I'm not saying go bet on Paul George as this year's MVP, but I am saying that in my opinion, he has had more of an impact on his team than Damian Lillard only during this season and this season. And given his impact, he should at least be acknowledged in the MVP talks, even if his name is 10th on the list.